Which leads us neatly on to our next presenter, Giles Hutchins, since this is exactly what he's going to tell us about. Says so right there in the title of his presentation. Now, the more observant of you will note, in fact, the ones who actually listen to Lawrence will note, we made a boo-boo on the program. We put evolutionary potential, not purpose. I'm not quite sure how that error crept in. Maybe we couldn't quite believe that Giles was going to be so ambitious. But we should have known better given the list of his accomplishments, which I will now regale you with. Giles is a pioneering practitioner, keynote speaker, advisor, and executive coach at the forefront of a revolution in leadership consciousness and organizational development. He applies consciousness-raising modalities, deep dive nature immersions, embodiment work, ancient wisdom tradition insights, future-fit organizational development approaches, and cutting-edge research on leadership development. He stimulates the headspace and heart-knowing for forward-leaning leaders and organizations to become vibrant, purposeful, and future-fit. He is author of the books The Nature of Business, The Illusion of Separation, which is available on our bookstand and can be signed by Giles, and Future Fit. Previously, Giles was business transformation lead with KPMG Consulting, and more recently, global head of sustainability solutions for Atos, the IT service multinational. He's co-founder of Regenerators, which is involved in exploring how sustainable architecture and development can take place. And Lawrence and I were very fortunate to be able to experience one of the meetings that they held. It was eye-opening to understand the constraints that face developers and architects. Oh, and he's also the co-founder of Biomimicry for Creative Innovation, chair of the Future Fit Leadership Academy, and advisor to a number of forward-thinking institutions. His latest TEDx talk at Wycliffe College UK is entitled Revolution, Separateness to Connectedness, and he blogs at www.thenatureofbusiness.org. And without further ado, over to you, Giles.
Thank you very much, Dominic. What a wonderful introduction, thank you. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here. What a fascinating yet challenging time to be alive. We're in the midst of a metamorphosis. Profound shifts are affecting the way we work, how and why we do things, and the purpose and meaning we bring to our organizations, our systems, and our wider civilization. It's what the ancient Greeks referred to as kaaios, a supreme moment in our human history, which, if not adequately acted upon, may pass us by. So how do we adequately act upon this monumentous moment? By a shift in consciousness, no less. And what do I mean by a shift in consciousness? Well, a shift in perception, in prehension, in way of engaging with reality. A relationality with reality which we can break down into three interwoven parts, if you like. Relationship with self, other, world. So the relationship with ourselves, our own self-awareness, our own ability to see our own habituations, blind spots, constrictions, and move beyond them through a process of individuation. And then our relationship with others, whether we're able to bring through the innate sociality and empathy that we have as human beings, or whether we get caught up in ego extenuation, competition, projection, control, and so forth. And our relationship with the world, whether we're able to bring in and sense into this interrelationality, this participatory engagement of this magnificence of life, or whether we get caught up in lenses of anthropocentrism and materialism. And it's this shift in consciousness, this way of attending, which is at the heart of our problems today. So often, whilst trying to find solutions to these ever-widening and deepening problems that we find, social, economic, and environmental, we apply the very same level of consciousness that created our problems in the first place to our well-intended solutions. And we just don't have time for this anymore. We need to get radical and deal with the root problem, which is this flawed way of attending. It's a neurosis of the mind, a pathology of our psychology, a psychosomatic dis-ease of epic proportions, which is infecting us. It's infecting our relationship with ourselves, undermining our potential to become truly human, infecting our relationship with others, so we get twisted down into a hyper-competitive, consumeristic, individualistic society, and it's affecting our relationship with the world, where we actually find ourselves unweaving the very fabric of life upon which we depend, burning the book of life before we've read it. So over the next 25 minutes, we're going to go on an exploration. We're going to explore what brought us here to this precipice, this threshold in our human history, and our way through this membrane, our upstretch into a deeper way of engaging with reality. So we might use the old shamanic journey of departure, separation, and return, a three-part journey that is key really to all ancient wisdom traditions and mythologies the world over, as a very powerful way of exploring our journey so far. So it seems that around 100,000 years ago, humans came out of Africa and colonized various habitable parts of the world, including Central Asia and Europe. And then from the period of about 100,000 years all the way up to about 10,000 years in Paleolithic and Neolithic Europe, from the pieces of anthropological and archaeological evidence that we can puzzle together, we see, it seems, that these communities, far from living brutish lives, actually lived in close communities with self-other world, had quite a lot of time for play, leisure, art, music, and had equalitarian cultures where male and female were equally valued, sky god and sky goddess were worshipped. As far as we can see, not much evidence of aggression or domination, or certainly widespread militarization. And it's been referred to as participation mystique, the worldview, deeply in participation with self-other world. But around 10,000 years ago, roughly, something happened. A shift happened in our climate and in our psyche. A departure from this participation meek. We begin our journey of separation. So what seems to happen is we begin what Steve Taylor, the anthropologist, refers to as the beginnings of an ego explosion, which changes our relationship of self-other world. And it comes with rising patriarchy. It comes with higher levels of stratification in communities, widespread militarization, and the use of technologies to exploit other humans and animals and plants. And this is part of our history because it leads to all sorts of, inverted commas, advancements. It brings the agricultural revolution, widespread use of currency, of the written word, all part of who we are today. And so over the years that then follow, through Hellenistic Greece, through the Roman Empire, through medieval Europe and into the Renaissance, we find these varying levels of separation. But there's still this deep sense of wild wisdom within nature. We still have a connection with nature. It's not until we get to around 500 years ago that another shift happens. Again, there's a change in climate, little mini ice age, and a change in psyche. Our sense of self twists even more, so that self-other world twists to such an extent that we almost start thinking that we are separate. Consciousness is no longer imbued within nature, within life, within creation. It becomes an epiphenomena of the brain. And if we're lucky, we might have a transcendental connection with God, but certainly not here within creation. And this twist brings all sorts of changes with it. It brings constructive aspects and destructive aspects. Constructively, we gain a sense of self-aggrandizement, which comes with self-empowerment and self-agency, self-responsibility, a freeing up from the kind of superstition and perhaps some of the religious dogma of the times before. That's important. And it also comes with a slightly different way of attending, a more narrowing down, mechanistic way of tending that no longer prioritizes the interrelational flow of life, but focuses on the bits and bytes, an objectified worldview, which becomes key to our rational, reductive, scientific method, with all of the advances in modern medicine, technology, and transportation that we enjoy today. And this then fuels the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, and even the postmodern era. Destructively, something also happens, the other side of the same coin, in that it comes with a sense of insecurity because we've pulled ourselves out of our own being, our own womb. And as Ted Hughes says here, the poet laureate, really the story of mind exiled from nature is the story of Western man. And it comes with this insecurity. It comes with a deep psychic atrophy that leads to increasing fear, anxiety, egotism, individualism, and consumerism. It's this that's actually at the heart of our challenges today. It's actually quite a bizarre situation that we live in at the moment. We're so caught up in it, so inured in it, that we perhaps don't see its own insanity. So just as an example, a dear friend of mine who I've known for many years was a well-respected teacher, secondary school in London, had been for 2 decades. Rings me up, tears, had a nervous breakdown, can't cope anymore. Goes and sees the doctor. The doctor looks him in the eyes and says, well, did you not know that this is a widespread problem? It's not just teachers, it's doctors, nurses. 1 doctor a week in the UK is committing suicide, far more having nervous breakdowns. In America, it's 1 a day committing suicide. On the train today on my way in, the slightly delayed train that was busy, I sat next to a lady from the Netherlands and we got chatting. And she explained how, without me even prompting, how there's a massive problem in the Netherlands. That was me thinking the Netherlands might be a bit better. But it's everywhere in the Western world. It's an epidemic. It's a breakdown. But there is good news. This very way of attending, this narrowing down, reductive perspective, this razor-eyed, laser gaze, has the ability to pierce its own illusion. It's amazing. It's as if reality, no matter how we are, always shows up. And so in these wonderful discoveries, increasingly sophisticated instruments and experiments that we prove in science, at the astro level, micro level, astrophysics, at the micro level within quantum physics, at the meso level within neurobiology and morphogenesis and so forth, we now are exploring a field, an interconnectedness. Jeremy touched on this. Lawrence touched on this. We know it exists. The very thing that we felt in our hearts back then, we're coming to again. We're beginning a return journey. David Bohm, brilliant British scientist, refers to the ground of all being, a formlessness that informs all form. It's there. Every electromagnetic vibration is immersed within a field. All of us are part of it. It's here in this very room. If we allow ourselves to cohere, to connect, we can, with our own attention, be in it. It's what connects us. So we now know this is coming out. We're finding this again. The matrice of all matter, the mother, the womb. So in adult developmental psychology, what does this mean for our own psyche? What's happening when we're in this return journey? And how easy is it? What's going on? And we've got some real specialists in the room, by the way. We've got Sharon and Frederick from Ashridge, who are exploring different intelligences within leadership. And we've got the legend Richard Barrett, who's kindly come as well, who's a great pioneer in consciousness. And I'd like to refer to the profoundly insightful work of Claire Graves, the adult developmental psychologist who explored different levels of consciousness in America in the 70s. And as early as the 70s, he found evidence of a new kind of level of consciousness appearing within our human population. Not just in individual cases, but coming through as a new wave. And it's been increasing. The integral psychologists I work with see evidence of this increasing since then. It's really interesting. He saw this as a monumental leap from tier 1 to tier 2 consciousness. Each of these levels, by the way, we go through little ego stage developments, little mini thresholds, oscillating between me to we, understanding individuality, understanding collective, understanding individuality, collective. We go back and forth as we go up these levels. And then when we get to the precipice of tier 1 consciousness, we have this leap into this return journey again. And he says, man at the threshold of the 7th level. So beginning of tier 2 is yellow in this model. It's called teal in integral psychology, which is the model that a gentleman called Frederick Laloux uses. And he has written a book called Reinventing Organizations, which has become hugely popular. There's about 200,000 practitioners applying it, working with this in business, which again is just a sign that this is happening. A shift is happening. There's Otto Scharmer's work that again refers to this, again hugely influential. So Claire Graves was well ahead of his time. We can now see this coming through. And he says that man at the threshold of this 7th level is at the threshold of being human. We have the chance to step into our human capacity. It's a threshold crossing, no less though, a death and rebirth. Whereupon there is the recognition of the magnificence of existence. Wow. We open up to how life really is. We sense into the relationality of reality again. With our increasingly sophisticated instruments and experiments, we are proving the innate weave and weft of this world. And now we are embodying it in our psyche. We're sensing into it. We're giving ourselves permission to open up to what everyone in their hearts knows is possible. And this gives us our sense of place and purpose, the desire to see that it will continue to be. It's that waking up to the magnificence that gives us our ability to be in service of life rather than being singly at odds with it. It's that waking up that gives us our sense of place and purpose, our evolutionary potential. So I'd also like to now refer to a little-known but brilliant mind called Owen Barfield from Oxford University, a professor in the 50s. It's not that well known. I've written about him extensively in The Illusion of Separation because it's well ahead of his time. It's brilliant. And it really corroborates with what Claire Graves was saying. I don't think the two knew of each other, actually. So in the 50s and 60s, he explored very much this 3-phase, from original participation, which is animism, participation mystique, how we go on this journey of alpha-beta thinking, which from him really begun with a drawing away of Aristotelian logic from Platonic thought, but then really accelerates in the scientific revolution with that alpha and beta, that rational reductive way of thinking, and the focus on the mathematical logic that underpins things rather than the physical and the empirical. And then we move into final participation. He saw evidence of this in the 50s and 60s. Claire Graves saw evidence of it in the 70s. For Owen Barfield, it was very much a shift in prehension, a phrase that Alfred North Whitehead uses, the process philosopher, which is a way of attending inwardly inside ourselves, which gives us a receptivity and an opening up to the imaginal realm, to use Henry Corbin's expression, where we sense into this depth of experience, which then gives us the ability to be more responsive to it. We open up to a sea of synchronicity. This shift is not necessarily easy in today's environment. And I'd like to use the powerful metaphor of the metamorphosis, which I think speaks at many levels of what we're going through. So in the early stages of the caterpillar's metamorphosis, it goes through a breakdown phase. So the structures of old begin to dissolve, and it's in the midst of this breakdown phase, in the midst of this breakdown soup, that these imaginal cells that are always present in the caterpillar, always present in our own human systems, begin to start forming imaginal groupings, start bringing in a new way. But they need the breakdown phase to activate them, which is, of course, what we're going through now. And then the caterpillar, still inured in the logic of yesterday, sees them as a threat to the status quo. So it fights them with vital energies, antibodies and so forth, undermines them. But they persist, we persist, in bringing through this new way of attending, this new consciousness. And as we persist, a consciousness threshold is reached in the consciousness of the caterpillar, in the consciousness of our human systems. And some sociological studies say that this can be as little as 10% or 15% of people in an organization or a system, when they're deeply resonating with purpose, then a shift happens. And this gives us hope. So then that metamorphic process happens. The caterpillar shifts its consciousness, realizes these imaginal cells for what they really are, which is prototyping the future, and uses vital energy to help them rather than undermine them. And quite quickly, the metamorphic process unfolds. This is what we're going through. But the chrysalis phase is needed. A chrysalis phase, a container, the hermetic seal, the cave, 40 days and 40 nights, the dark night of the soul, the vision quest. How often do we give ourselves the time to go through that kind of psychological container, to go through a breakdown, breakthrough, in today's modern hurry up and get on with it culture? And so this happens. We like to think that there are powerful forces at play in the world, elite forces that are invested in the caterpillar because we're more easy to be manipulated. And perhaps that's right at a certain level, but let's not forget that actually the resistance also happens in here, you and me, as the employees, employers, consumers, leaders, change agents, to cross our own thresholds in terms of how I show up each evolving moment. That's the front line. So how? How do we do this shift? How do we upstretch into Tier 2 consciousness? Activating our supernature. So I'd like to refer to the grandfather, or godfather, if you like, of psychoanalytics, Carl Jung. He says he studied our psychology for many years in depth, and he explores 4 ways of knowing: the intuitive, the rational, the emotional, and the somatic ways of knowing that we have within inside ourselves, part of our human repertoire. And these have been loosely related to elements within nature and also loosely related to intelligences. So, intuition, insight, fire. And that has been related to SQ. Donna Zohar and others at Oxford University exploring it, also quantum intelligence, for those who are uncomfortable with the word spiritual. And then there is the emotions, the feelings, the water element that are inside us all the time going on, which we know affect the way how we show up in the world. And that is EQ. Daniel Goleman and others, 2 decades ago, wrote about this and brought this into common business parlance. So we now know it's everywhere. We've accepted it now. We didn't at the time when it first came out, even though the ancients have long understood it. We poo-pooed it, but now it's accepted. It's everywhere. You know, there's scientific studies showing us that people with high EQ are very effective in today's workplace. We know it. And then there's the somatic intelligence. So the soma is our body and our embodied wisdom. Somatic intelligence, the earth element, keeps us here. We now know, and again, these are only recent findings, so it hasn't really caught on yet, so people are still a bit unsure about it, even though the evidence is there. We have it. Scientific evidence is there. The intelligence in the flesh, what Guy Claxton here in the UK refers to. Every cell and sinew in our body contributes to this body-mind. Candice Pert, the famous neurobiologist in America, refers to a psychosomatic network through our entire body-mind, aligning our gut, heart, and brain all the time. We're interrelating. So we know that this somatic intelligence, emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, all of these are interrelating all the time, contributing to our human repertoire. And then there is the fourth element, air, the rational analytic mind that is so good at getting the job done, doing the to-do list, engineering solutions, project managing. We need it. It's great, it focuses in, it takes things out of that abstract, lived-in context, draws hard lines, gets rid of the interrelationality and focuses in and objectifies. We need that way of attending. It's brought everything that we rely on in many regards. Certainly the mobile phone and 5G. And yet what's happened over the recent decades is that it seems that we are getting more and more caught up in this rational analytic way of attending to such an extent that it is now actually crowding out and undermining all these other intelligences, corrupting our human potential. So we need to cross a threshold to integrate these intelligences again. We need to allow our body-mind to become that hermetic vessel, that alchemic vessel for integrating these intelligences so we can tap into the fifth element, which is the akasha, the field, the ground of all being. So we can tap into our innate wisdom and the magnificence of life. It's a profound shift. These words don't do it justice, but they help explain a logic that we're going through. And it's the logic that we can see. I work mainly with leaders in business because it's such a powerful force for good and not so good on the planet today. And there is a shift happening. I sense it. It's essentially a shift from separation to interconnection or into being. A fundamental shift from rational analytic to embodied way of knowing. From a machine logic to the logic of life. We are activating the logic of life. And when we look deep into nature, we see that there are essential life dynamics, principles and patterns that we would do well to adhere to. So we've been exploring this, myself and Laura Storm at Regenerators, exploring in detail. And what I'm just about to share with you is a lot of information. Usually we would take people into nature for about 3 or 4 days and explore it. Next week in Copenhagen, we'll be doing 1-day masterclass on it. I'm going to spend a couple of moments with you, so I do apologize, but I know you're an intelligent bunch. 3 levels of learning from nature, 3 levels of activating the logic of life. So the first is living systems design, and Jen has already explored this a bit, as has Dominic, talking about permaculture, for instance. Ways in which we can look at the patterns and life principles that we find within the living systems that we operate in and apply these to our ways of designing products, processes. So this is biomimicry design, this is permaculture, this is closed-loop economics, circular economy, waste equals food, industrial ecology, biophilic design in our workplaces. A lot of really interesting work going on at the moment. Lots of innovations, very exciting. Part of that workshop that you both attended was part of that. Lots is happening. And then there is applying living systems logic to our cultures, our human cultures, and our organizations, recognizing that our organizations aren't machines, but they are actually living systems. And when we can see that there are essential life dynamics that we can apply to our own human ways of approaching life, we can see that there's an essential dynamic of divergence, opening up, convergence, bringing together, and out of that tension of the two comes emergence, the way in which we find our flow, the way in which we deal with our evolutionary potential. So divergence in business is in terms of diversifying, distributing decision-making, decentralized decision-making that empowers people to make change happen at the local level. Part of what you were talking about, Jen. And also embracing diversity. But as you said, not just diversity in terms of age, creed, culture, and gender, which is very important, but also in terms of perceptual horizon, how we see things, bringing in different parts of the system, different people from different parts of the silos, so those silos permeate more readily, different people from different parts of the stakeholder ecosystem, so the organizational membrane permeates more readily. We're increasing the relationality of our organizations, making them come alive, moving out of these soul-sapping mechanistic cultures that we've got caught up in. And that divergence needs to be balanced with convergence, otherwise the organization becomes too chaotic, too amorphous. And that convergence has traditionally come through power-based hierarchies of control, because of all of that patriarchy and ego explosion, scientific management thinking that we talked about. So that is not helping, because that actually undermines the divergence. So instead, we want convergence to come through a sense of purpose, as Jen discussed. And when we mean a sense of purpose, we don't mean rejigging the mission statement or putting a new values charter on the wall. We mean deeply developing a resonant sense of purpose in the organization. Extraordinary things happen when people resonate with the organizational sense of purpose. But for it to deeply resonate, to touch our humanity, it means that the organizational sense of purpose in some way needs to be enhancing life, needs to be life-affirming, because that's what turns us on. And these thresholds, as I say, sociological studies show, can be as little as 10 or 15% people in the organization deeply resonating with their organizational sense of purpose. A shift happens. It becomes easier to let go of those power-based hierarchies of control and allow more divergent ways of operating to happen. The organization comes alive, and we find emergence, flowing. So that's living systems organization. Living systems being is the third level. Now, this interrelates with those other two levels. The quality of our being, our presence. So I take leaders out into nature. That's what I really love doing. That's my heart work. And even for just half an hour, which is totally inadequate, it's usually a day, but let's do half an hour. Even half an hour, we can see, science shows us, with electrodes over our body-mind, that with certain activities we do, interrelational work that we do, we shift. Physiologically and psychologically, we change. Tissue repair rates improve. Stem cell reproduction improves. Hormones change. Our senses liven. The synaptial connections in our brain enhance. Left and right brain hemispheres interrelate more readily. The corpus callosum comes alive. The head, the heart, and the gut start to interrelate. Our brainwave frequencies change and embed themselves on the deeper waves of the heart. We become in tune with life. Our heartbeat starts to become in tune with Gaia and the universe. We become human beings once again. We open up to the wisdom of life. So we interrelate those three levels to activate the logic of life. Nothing more, nothing less. So to summarize, we are in the midst of a metamorphosis. Profound shifts are affecting the way we work, how and why we do things, and the purpose and meaning we bring to our organizations, our systems, and our wider civilizations. And the more conscious we can be in each evolving moment, the more able we are to bring in this consciousness every day, the more we allow this metamorphic shift to happen, and it unfolds, and we start to open up to the magnificence of existence. And so now I'll finish on a quote from the well-respected business futurist, John Naisbitt. He says that the greatest breakthroughs of the 21st century won't occur because of technology. They will occur because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. Now, I love that. To be involved in this expanding concept of what it means to be human, to help us, Homo sapiens, live up to our name wise beings in a deeply wise, sentient and interconnected world. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you. Thank you.